In this recording, I'm going to continue where I left off in my last one, where I just did a screen replacement, adding some graphics to this tablet. And in this recording, I'm going to introduce some basic rotoscoping techniques. Rotoscoping is when you cut something out from video so that it can be composited above something else or isolated in some fashion. In this case, I need to rotoscope these two thumbs and place them above the screen. Now, in After Effects, there's more than one strategy or more than one way for doing rotoscoping. One approach is to use masks. Another approach is to use the Rotobrush tool, and I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate both. I'll start with the thumb that's on the left-hand side here. I'll duplicate my movie layer that's down the bottom by hitting Command D. I'll rename the layer by hitting Return, and I'm going to call it Thumb Left. And I'm going to move that layer above my screen replacement. Now, to use masks, we would use the pen tool and or shape tools to create masks. Now we can do this directly in the composition viewer, but when you're rotoscoping, it's a better idea to double click your layer, isolating your layer into the layer viewer so you can work exclusively on that layer, at least to get things started. Now it's still showing me my tracker points from the earlier demonstration, so I'll close the tracker, and in the layer viewer here where it shows me my view option, I'm going to switch it from tracker points to masks. Now I'll take my pen tool, I'll zoom in on the left thumb here, using the space bar to access the hand tool as needed to center my viewer, and I'll click with the pen tool and create a mask, drawing a mask around that thumb. And when you draw with the pen tool, of course, if you click and drag, you get a curve point, and then you want to close the loop by clicking on that first vertex point that you started with to create a mask. And as soon as you do that, it masks out the the outer area. Now, obviously, this video, the thumb moves, right? The perspective changes, the thumb moves. So a couple things here. I need to animate the mask shape, and I also need to be able to see this background area while I'm working. So in this layer viewer, I'm going to uncheck this render option so I can still see the background as I'm working. And then to animate that shape, I come down here to my layer, hit M for mask to reveal the mask group, and I click the stopwatch for mask path. Notice also there's a color swatch next to the mask group. So if the color that it has kind of randomly assigned is kind of hard to see, click on the color swatch and you can change the color option, maybe choosing something that's a little easier to spot and work with. Now at this point, I'm going to move the time marker forward and basically just going to modify my mask. Now in this example, I do not need to redraw the mask shape or keyframe it every single frame. This is a relatively simple example. I can get away with just taking the arrow tool and picking up and moving the mask. And if I need to rotate it or scale it at all, I can double click it or hit Command T on the keyboard, and that gives me a transform box that I can use to modify the position, rotation, and scale of the entire selected mask. So in this case, I'm basically just going to go about a half a second or so at a time, and I'm going to repeat this process of just picking up and moving, double clicking the mask shape to kind of keep it, where I want it. So I'll continue this process. And if I need to move individual little points, you can click and drag with the arrow to select them, and then move the points individually. So do pay attention to which vertex points you have selected. You can have, all of them selected, or you could have just an individual one selected. And of course, when you hit Command T or drag, it is going to affect the selected vertex points. All right, so I'll continue this process until I've got the entire thumb, pretty much rotoed for the entire length of the timeline here. Now, some of you may be wondering, could I use the mask tracker for this? As I showed in an earlier demonstration in my recording about adjustment layers and effects and mask tracker, I showed how to use the mask tracker. You could certainly try it, but there's a lot of area of the same color value here. And so the mask tracker would probably jump around quite a bit. So as tedious as this may seem, this is actually probably an easier, better way to go about doing this, at least as far as using masks. Now, as you'll see a little later in this demonstration, the Rotobrush will be a quicker and easier approach in this case. Although in production pipelines, a lot of times the masking method is preferred, even though the Rotobrush can be quicker and easier. A lot of times in production pipelines, this method is preferred because it produces a vector path. The Rotobrush technique, as we'll see in just a few moments here, is based on pixels, as opposed, it's like a magic wand selection, as opposed to doing a vector mask. Okay, now if I scrub the time marker back and through here, I can see how it looks. And if I need to set any additional keyframes, like moving individual points or making adjustments, I can do so. It doesn't really matter how many keyframes it takes you to do this, as long as the end result is, what you want. Okay, so that looks all right for now. I'll switch back to the composition viewer so that I can see the composited result. See, if I solo that layer, you can see I've got that thumb now cut out on its own layer in the composition. Now, in the context of the composition viewer, there is a button right here to toggle mask and shape path visibility. So if you want to be able to see that path and make further adjustments in the context of your composite, you can. And a good tip is to use the J and the K keys on your keyboard to jump from keyframe to keyframe. J and K for jumping from keyframe to keyframe, and that way you can make adjustments as needed in the context of the composite, which is a good idea. Okay, because it's one thing to cut it out in the layer viewer where you've got the layer isolated, but then you also want to take a look at it in the context of your composition so you can see how it's looking with your other layers combined. Okay, I think in this case that's certainly good enough for this demonstration. So now I'll hide the path line, and the last thing I'll do here is open up the entire mask group so that I can access the mask expansion property to expand or contract the edge, and then use the mask feather value to soften that edge a little bit. So in this case, I think I want to tighten it in a little bit and feather it a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good. I'll go ahead and preview. All right, not bad. I'll zoom back out, look at it at 100%. Of course, that's the actual resolution, so not bad. Okay, now let's do the other thumb, and let's take a look at the other method for doing basic rotoscoping in this program, and that is the Rotobrush. So I'll go back to my movie layer, duplicating it one more time, renaming it. This one I'll call Thumb Right. And again, I'll move it to the top of the stack. I'll double click it to isolate it in the layer viewer. Now this time though, instead of using the pen tool to create a vector path, I'm going to come over here to this tool called the Rotobrush. The Rotobrush is a paint tool. It's a paint effect, basically. And when we bring the cursor into the layer viewer, we see a circular brush size. Now, if you're familiar with the quick selection tool in Photoshop, that is basically what this tool is. It makes an automatic selection based on the color that you paint on. Now, first you want to adjust the brush size. On the Mac, you hold the Command key and click and drag to increase or decrease the brush size. On the PC, that would be Control and then clicking and dragging. So you pick a brush size and then you paint within the area that you are trying to select. As soon as you let go, it creates a selection. The pink line indicates the selection. So just like Photoshop, except instead of the kind of marching ant line, it's a pink line. Now the nice thing about the Rotobrush here is we don't have to necessarily do that for every single frame. We can basically set it up once and then let it analyze the rest of our frames. Now I wasn't really paying attention to where my time marker was. Better idea here is to start at the beginning. So in fact, let me set it up again. I'm going to come here to my layer, go to Effects. You can see it shows up in the effects. So I'm going to click on it and hit Delete. That way I can just start again. And I'll start at time 0 this time. So again, clicking and painting with the Rotobrush, it automatically makes a selection. And since I'm starting at the beginning this time, you can see here in the layer viewer this little green marker indicating that that is my start frame or my base frame. And now I can hit page down to go a frame forward. And continue to hit page down. You can see that it propagates the selection forward automatically. If it's doing a good job, you can just tap the space bar and let it do its thing. Now, if it over-selects, if it selects too much, which in this case it's not, but I just want to point out that if it does, if it were to start to select too much of an area like that, holding the Option key or Alt on the PC will make it become a minus brush, and you can paint to tell it, no, don't select that area. Like that. So you can make corrections by painting to add areas when it's green or subtract areas when it's red. All right, I'll go ahead and continue the analysis here, and it will, go through the clip and continue to propagate that selection forward. Analyzing the layer, if I hit play, you can see that the selection carries forward, and the entire timeline here in the layer viewer is now green, indicating that it's been analyzed. Now, when you're happy with the result, this is kind of an important step here, and I need to make the window a little bigger so you can see the button. There's a button right here that says Freeze. When you're happy with the result and you no longer want to add or subtract areas to it, it's real important to hit this freeze button, because that is basically going to lock in the mat that it has created. And if you don't click that button and you continue to work, every time you do something, it's going to be recalculating the mat, and it's going to take, a long time. You're going to be looking at that spinny wheel a lot. So yeah, real important to click that freeze button when you're done with the initial selection. So that locks it in, and then you don't have to wait for it to recalculate as you continue to work and do stuff. Now, when it is frozen, though, you can no longer make changes to it with the Rotobrush. You would have to unfreeze it to be able to add or subtract areas to the selection. So you'll see here when it's done, the button is going to change to unfreeze. Or I guess it doesn't say unfreeze, you just would unclick the button. All right, so I'll switch back to the composition viewer now, And now we can see that that thumb is cut out. I'll zoom in, take a closer look. And down here in the timeline, I can either expand the layer, go into the effects and expand the effects there, or in the effect control panel over here, you can see it has added the Rotobrush as an effect. And a lot of the stuff is grayed out because I'm not using the refine edge brush, which would be more for dealing with things like hair. And I'll save that for another example. But by default, it does give us feather, contrast, shift, and reduce chatter settings. Contrast is basically to stiffen or harden the edge. Feather is to soften it. And shift edge to expand or contract. And then reduce chatter if the edge is, jumping around or chattering a lot, which in this case it's pretty good, so I don't probably need that. But what I will do is use the shift edge to maybe tighten the edge in a little bit, and then use the feather value to soften. So kind of like what I did with the other thumb using the mask expansion and the mask feather. All right, I'll zoom back out here, load up a preview, and take a look. So you be the judge. Does the thumb on the left that I did with the mask look better, or does the thumb on the right that I did with the Rotobrush look better? In this case, they're both pretty good, but I think the one on the right is maybe a little better, and it was certainly a little quicker and easier. So there you have it. Quick look at the two basic rotoscoping techniques you have available inside of After Effects using either masks or using the Rotobrush. And I'll do some future recordings where we take a closer look at frame-by-frame rotoscoping with the pen tool, and another one where we take a closer look at the Rotobrush and introduce the refine edge features for dealing with things like hair. All right, hope this helps you out, and I'll see you in the next video.